Welcome back to the Betsperts Golf DFS Show ahead of the Valero Texas Open. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by none other than PGA Splits 101. You know him in the Discord as Ron Klos. Ron, we are fresh off match play. How did everything go for you and the subscribers on the back end?
Yeah, let's just say excited to get back to stroke play here. Yeah, it was interesting last week. It was very fun to watch. Enjoyed it a great deal. But yeah, Valero Open. I know everyone's kind of looking forward to next week, but we're going to kind of dig in here as best we can and see what edges we can find this week.
Our best bets came through. Remember, free article on the back end. We post every Wednesday afternoon. I came this close to Bland over DeChambeau. This close. Bland had about 7 putts he should have made to win those holes over DeChambeau, but nonetheless did not come through on day one. But also, we can't be a trio without third. And no Ryan Noonan today. Instead, we are bringing on a very special guest. You know him as the creator of the Golflandia pod and someone I actually personally listen to for his overarching thoughts on game theory. And that's why I'm very excited to record for the first time today with none other than Matthew Wiley. Matt, how's everything going for you in PGA DFS?
Oh, it's going great. I'm so glad you played that song I wrote in the intro. Does your audience know I wrote that song?
No, they don't.
Oh, I didn't. I'm good. No, I enjoyed last week with match play because we were talking beforehand. You can gain a little bit of leverage writing rules, and if A, then not B. Whereas week to week in DFS, as you know, for golf is very much like Keno. I've made that reference on Twitter. But perhaps you do okay this week. I had Kisner as well, of course, and he flamed out. I think he just got a little tired. That's it. Who's the third guest usually? Ryan? You said Ryan Noonan?
Yeah, Noonan is usually the third one. He has a lot on his plate, though. And also, we're just making it important to bring on guests from around the industry, especially because guys like I'm really excited to talk to. Next week, for instance, just to tease ahead, we're bringing on Notorious. You know him from Roto Grinders. Yeah, of course, yeah. And so I'm excited to talk with Noto. And then you, of course, you're here. And I think it's important that you're here because this is an interesting tournament, one that some say lacks some motivation, even though I disagree. We'll get to that later on. But we head to TPC San Antonio Oaks course, which is actually, just fun fact, just 30 minutes north of my favorite cocktail bar in the area, Bar 1919, if you're ever around there. But also, it is where a majority of industry discussion circles like vultures around course length, right? 3 or 4 par 5s here, infamously play around 600 yards. Narrow fairways abound with hazards sneakily awaiting at every single corner. Just think back to, we all recall Kevin Na's 16 on the scorecard at the 9th hole in 2011. And then, of course, the average approach shot over the last 5 years here has come from 183 yards out. So succinct long iron play is also a necessity. But even though logic then, Ron, tells us that we should gravitate towards accurate bombers in our lineups, you actually have an entirely different take on the matter for DFS this week.
So just a few things before we get into that. So again, with the greens, our Poa Trivialis again. So we have that same very smooth putting surface. Slower green speeds this week, running around 11 on the stent meter. And I think when you kind of combine those two things, you've noticed here in the past, it kind of brings some bad putters into the mix. All you have to do is look at Corey Connors from 2 years ago to see that exemplified. And yeah, it's a difficult course overall, averaging about 0.23 strokes over par the past 5 events. Wind, obviously living down here in Texas, I'm very used to it, but kind of one of the main variables in terms of how tough this course will actually get will be the wind strength. Looking at the forecast right now, kind of looks like Friday will definitely have some impact with wind for sure. And but just down here, that wind can pop up at any time. We have some difficult par 5s. They are the 3rd toughest on tour. And that's kind of one of the big things I'm targeting this week is if you go back and look over the past 8 winners, 4 of them have actually led the field in par 5 scoring. We have deep bunkers. Sand save percentage ranks very low here. Another thing kind of related to what you're getting into is approach. I mean, this is clearly a second shot course for me. You have very firm elevated greens, which are tiered, and they do repel approaches at a very high percentage. GIR percentage, greens in regulation, is only 60% here. And another thing, it's been very dry down here lately. So I would expect a very firm course when play starts on Thursday. And there's also numerous runoff areas around the greens. And with so many greens being missed, scrambling is going to come into play here as well. And just really quick off the tee, players, when you read their quotes, they do say, you do need to be somewhat accurate here. And again, going back to your Kevin Na example, there are some kind of wooded brush areas when you get really wide off the fairway. But that's mostly for guys who are, kind of tend to spray it very wildly. But the rough, this is kind of known as one of the most non-penal rough on tour. Amazingly, the birdie percentage was higher from the rough than from the fairway over the past 3 years. And 3 of the past 5 winners led the field in greens and regulation percentage. Last year's winner, Jordan Spieth, he finished 4th in that area. So, yeah, just overall, I'm really targeting ball strikers who are strong in approach and also rank high in par 5 scoring.
Ron may have covered it all, Matthew, but does anything else stand out among this course or a way we should attack DFS lineups that you think everyone's doing one thing and we should say, no, actually, I'd prefer to do this because it's unique?
No, I think Ron, or as we affectionately call him, Splits.
Splits,
amazing splits. Yeah, I was talking to Circling the Drain, as I said beforehand, and he's like, I affectionately refer to him as Splits. And so, no, his stuff is so good on Twitter, and it's, amongst a crowded space of content, it really stands out. I will add nothing. I really don't have much to add. I will say that I did speak with a former winner here, and I did speak with another pro who plays here regularly, that they encapsulated in one word: ball striking. That's it. You have to be accurate off the tee. It's going to be windy, which is going to make it more difficult. Yes, the Na example is one way of disaster. That was an anomaly. I don't know. Mm-hmm. His brain just melted. And you need to watch the video if you haven't seen it. But you can get in trouble off the tee, especially if it's windy. The greens are very tough to hit. The shaved runoffs. Good scrambling is a great point. And the other thing I would say is that your dog? Someone's at the door. Someone said that Texas guys play well here, and it's true. Look at Charlie Hoffman owns this place. Spieth does well. So there, I think that's everything. So,
and we're fresh off a course in which we also discussed last week, Texas players playing well. And, maybe Scotty Scheffler won just because he's damn good at golf, but also because he does have the history there. So interesting to see that we may just stack that theory moving forward. And with that case, let's just go ahead and jump into it then. And Matthew, let me explain what we typically do here, just in case you haven't seen. And that is we're going to pull up elite as we move on here. Elite, a top tier of golfers, a middle tier, and a lower tier. But we're not necessarily talking about picks. This is basically a group of players that I think are important for a variety of reasons. And I'll explain as we go on. In this top tier, I mentioned, for those listening on the podcast, Rory McIlroy, Hideki Matsuyama, Jordan Spieth, Abraham Ancer, and Bryson DeChambeau. What stands out is that they actually are just the only golfers on DraftKings that are priced above 10K. And so I'm curious, and I want to get your takes on this first. When you're building lineups, did it start with this, or do you think for whatever reason you can just skip beyond this tier and move to building a core around 9K players or perhaps high 8K?
It's really based on ownership, right? That's where you get when we build 150 lineups, for instance, our target when we talk after lock is how many of them are unique. And so, sometimes we're in the 140s out of 150, 144. Sometimes, only 2 are duplicated. It's because we play around ownership. Either you're going 2x, 3x, certain X over a one player, or completely fade chalk. Like Xander last week was a completely fade for me in match play. It turned out to be an okay one. But if that works, right, you then Xander, who's 25% owned, you've wiped out. You're now ahead of 25% of the entries in a $100,000 entry contest. So this week, I really don't know yet. It's certainly not off the table to fade 10 and above. I never really buy. You mentioned this earlier. Speaking with players who have won on tour, there's never an instance in their mind that someone comes to a tournament to not win or not play well or just tune up and miss the cut. Now, if they are 8 over on Friday, perhaps. but they are there to play and they're there to win. The chalk, though, in that I don't see the group. I don't know if I should be looking at something or not, but I know the names you're talking about. Rory's going to be top chalk projected, 25%. Now, do you want Rory? What is he? 11K plus?
11-2.
11. Do you want Rory 11-2, who probably has more gears focused? He was just in Augusta today. I think he's still there.
Which is odd, right? He's in Austin. He's not in Austin 48 hours before his tee time. And as someone who wanted to play Rory despite the chalk, I am worried.
Right. And you got Rory, who is completely hyper-focused on this. It gnaws at him, and it makes him physically ill leading up to the Masters, focusing on winning this tournament. My thing with Rory, 25% owned Rory as top chalk. The rule is, thanks to Scotty Mack, if he getting me on this on Twitter, is fade top price chalk. The worst thing Rory can do, I think, is do well here. Why? Because he really dusts himself sometimes in spotlight and major tournaments. Look at Portrush. The spotlight is not on him right now, and I don't think it'll be on him unless he does something miraculous here. If he does win the Valero, he's under the heat lamp. If not, it's Scheffler next week. It's Rahm next week. It's even a Cam Smith next week. And he can kind of sail in there and maybe just be a little more relaxed. So does that answer your question? I kind of ran.
It does. That's exactly the kind of conversation we try to have on this show. So I love it. And honestly, to your point, on our back end at betspertsgolf.com, currently Ron, or Splits, I should say, has Rory as the highest projected owned golfer, coming in 25 to 30%. So that tells you where we should be on him among the rest in this range. But Ron, I also think it's an interesting conversation in this range because, for instance, the next guy down at 10-8, Matsuyama, was recently just scratched with a back injury 15 minutes before the players, or 15 minutes after players' lineups locked. And so we don't know his injury status, even though he is playing. You would expect him to be somewhat at full health. And we also don't know what the field is going to do, if they're going to use recency bias. Jordan Spieth, also defending champ here. Abraham Answer played really well in match play before getting eliminated in the Elite Eight. And then Bryson, of course, who didn't even seem like he was going full bore ahead, seemed to still be playing slow and getting his driver swing back, most recently at match play. So I'm curious where your thoughts start in this range, if they even start here.
Yeah, there's just a lot of question marks around all these guys. I mean, starting with Rory, the Masters is the one he's looking for. And, he usually doesn't play the week before major. I think before the Masters, it's been all the way back since 2014. So, I think his quote was something about, he wants to come to kind of clear his head. And obviously he's trying to be as sharp as he can be heading into next week. So, just the ownership, kind of what Matt said, it's just, I don't think you can plan with that number. Going down, Hideki with the injury concerns, he just, I would expect him to be somewhat rusty heading into the Valero here. You got Spieth, who won last year. Now, Spieth does typically tend to play more the week before major, and, he's had some success, obviously, winning this event last year. And even going back further, he's had some really good tournaments the week before, whether it's the U.S. Open and some others. But, he just hasn't looked all that sharp either. Abraham Answer, I don't know how you can play him at that price, 10-3 every week. And this does appear to be, a pretty solid course fit for him. But, every time I play him, he either misses the cut or he just doesn't perform to expectations. And lastly, Bryson, I kind of view this week as just another chance for him to get ready for next week. So for me, I'm pretty much fading this entire top group. And as we get lower here, kind of into that mid-range, I'm kind of looking at motivation really, really big this week. Guys who are trying to punch a ticket to the Masters. Those are kind of the main grouping here as we get to that I'll be focusing on.
Does that mean you're also just fading this tier altogether, Matthew? And you'd rather start your lineups like in the high 9Ks, mid 9Ks, around that range?
Well, for Bryson, someone tweeted me today. He was at the match play watching Bryson hit balls. He said, I think he had this is all hearsay. You never know what's true. Mm-hmm. But he said he had 100 balls, had 3 coaches around him. I'm paraphrasing this, and didn't hit one flush. So he's kind of a little bit Bryson broken. And Jordan Spieth is the interesting one, right? I mean, I can get I get your case behind Matsuyama and the injury question marks. Answer his ownership sub 10 is very interesting, but Spieth, he's a Texas guy. He's won here before, right? Yes, he won last year here, and now he's sub 15 as the third price player. That's, and I think he will be sub 15%. I mean, people look at the swing in the driving range and say, "Oh, he's broken. He can't play anymore." I mean, you want a Texas player in the wind who's won here last year? I mean, I'm telling you this: if Spieth wins this week, his ownership. I hope he doesn't, because his Masters ownership is going to be going noticed. He's going to be sort of wedged in a tight area. So, the pricing.
And you mentioned Answer sub 10%. I would say that would be the contrarian playing out the top, just to differ, because I think right now, we're getting Answer at 7-8% as well. And so
that's insane to me. I don't think that holds. I mean,
okay. Yeah. I haven't heard anyone steam him just yet, but again, it's Tuesday. We try to be ahead of this thing. So if he does get up, that wouldn't be shocking. And then of course we'd have to redirect and go somewhere else. The middle
now
tier,
looking at Kazire chalk. Okay. Just say that out loud. Patton Kazire is chalk. I don't know who's responsible for that.
And also, let's start with this middle tier now, because we're also looking at Corey Connors chalk. And that's why I want to start with you. You already mentioned Scotty Mac pointing out to you that we're fading 25+% elite pricing golfers just for the volatility of the game. So with Corey Connors, 9,800. And also among this tier, by the way, we're going to talk about along the way, Maverick McNeely, 9,500. Gary Woodland, 9,300. Chris Kirk, 9,400, I think is really interesting. And then Charlie Hoffman, even though he's in complete shit recent form, just what he's done at this tournament alone is worth discussing. But let's start with you about Corey Connors, because recency bias will probably cause him to be the most rostered player, at least in this range. Maybe not more than Rory, but in this range. So what do you do with quote unquote, mid price golfers who we also expect to be 20+%?
Well, I was hoping that Corey Connors didn't perform so well last week in match play, but all of a sudden he's discovered an incredible short game, and he's a good putter. He's a better putter, and he is so level-headed. I mean, he just doesn't change emotions at all. Scheffler seems the same way.
It's that tempo. The tempo, it's part of his brain. It's just all works fluidly. Yeah.
And now he's 76 at Augusta, which will be super chalk, probably number one. I think he's number 1 or 2 this week. I think he could surpass Rory in terms of ownership. It makes it for a very difficult week, because he's everything you want at this course, right? And he almost won. He did win, excuse me. So, I mean, Corey is tough. The ones I cannot justify as top 5 chalk, I need a new word for chalk, owned. Chris Kirk at 9,400, that just doesn't. I mean, he's a very good golfer, but that's one I could see fading. I mean, so those are the ones that are highly owned right now in that range. Let me look at the 9s. Tony Finau is below priced of Kirk and Bradley. How far has he fallen? I mean, that's insane. He'll still pick up some ownership. Jason Day's kind of interesting. One golfer did tell me, and I'm not huge into, he just texted me before the show, because I was like, I really love Rory. And he's like, I don't really love him as much because the wind is going to be he lives down there, so vicious that at apex height, it can mess with, your ball flight on difficult to reach greens. Day hits a very high ball too. So not like these guys can't flight it, but look at Gary Woodland. He hits a very low trajectory. That's why he has troubles at Augusta. I kind of like Gary Woodland. I like Gary Woodland to win, potentially.
Interesting. What about you, Ferran, in this range? Knowing Connors will be highly rostered, I still think Maverick McNeely is a tremendous play. Just the fact he was, shoot in for Sam Burns, a DFS free square at 6,200 last year, at just a price point to get up to higher, more expensive players. Finished 2-0-1 match play, beat Justin Thomas in the opening round, and strokes gained long form really matches well with this course, especially with Corey Connors at the price overlooking him. But we already heard Matthew, Gary Woodland. Chris Kirk, I think, is the contrarian play as well. I don't think he'll be highly rostered at all. And so just curious, where your thoughts start in this range?
So, I'm actually starting with Si Woo. I've got him coming in around 9% right now. I know I don't really treat course history too highly here, but he finished 23rd last year and then was 4th the year before. So I think he's going to be somewhat contrarian and kind of dipping down. Once we get into this Maverick McNeely at 9,500, he's been so consistent. When you kind of dig into the numbers, like he's gained strokes 9 of his past 10 events. And just that level of consistency, that desire that I know he's got to have to get into the Masters. He's probably where I'm going to start most of my lineups. Got him kind of right around that 15% mark right now. So not too high. Chris Kirk, obviously he is getting talked up more today from what I've been hearing. Another guy, very consistent, really good course history here. Like Wiley said, Gary Woodland, he kind of seems to be putting it all together. He's got, 2 top 5s recently down in Florida. He's gained on approach his last 4 events. Texas course, he also has some good history in this state. So Woodland's another guy I really like. I think Tony Finau is really interesting this week. People are talking about how, he had 9 birdies at match play that last day. A lot of other people are just down on him. I initially was too, but, looking back, he's got some good course history kind of in Texas as well. And, 9,100 coming in at 12%. That's interesting to me, Wiley. Do we dig back on Tony here?
Okay. So, I'm in treatment for addiction to Tony Finau, right?
That's why I asked you.
He's a big, beautiful man. He does everything well. His short game probably the most underrated on tour, or at least part of his game, at least because everyone thinks he's a bomber, and he is. There's a tweet this afternoon that said, "What's the best financial advice you've ever received?" And I said, "Fading Tony Finau." At some point, you have to send him to the graveyard and just understand and live with that decision. Kyle Stanley, for instance, addicted, gone. Finau, I kind of almost have to. You said 9 birdies in match play day 3. Day 1 and day 2 were abomination. I had 35% Tony Finau at Webb Simpson. I thought that was the kill shot, and it was not. I don't know. He's kind of broken, right? But low. I think you said 12%, and that's the projection. I think he's going to come some 10%.
I was going to guess 7%.
Yeah.
So if I told you 7 to 10% Tony Finau,
I'm 40%. I'm going 7.
Okay, then you're overweight. Okay.
Yeah. He's hard to quit. Here's the other thing. There's multiple players here that I hope don't do well because of ownership value at the Masters, which I have in my notes. Always play Tony Finau regardless. He could be, asleep. You play him. He's going to be nothing next week if he doesn't perform well here. So I don't know. It's a tough call. 7% though.
Whether you end up going overweight on Finau or not, do you want to start your lineups this week with 2 or 3 guys in this range? Is that what you're trying to prioritize, knowing we can jam in a lot of the lower tier we're about to talk about?
Not necessarily, because I don't. In my first instinct was knowing what kind of course this is, in a second place finish here, I think 10 years ago, to be a very good driver of the ball and very good tee to green. And the other stuff sort of irons itself out. It seems to be a fantasy land for Rory McIlroy's game. Wind agnostic, right? So even if he's 25%, I don't know. I have a very tough time not saying, okay, I'm going to lock him or be double or maybe 1.5. And that creates problems at 11-2 with other players in the 9 range.
It's like you mentioned.
Strictly the Drain City can make an entire team off 6K players, but that's his game. So perhaps we can do something.
It's like you mentioned also the ghost of Augusta haunting Rory. That's actually what comes to my mind more so than like how well he's been driving, like in his last 48 rounds. His recent play as well. It's just the fact that how much is Georgia really weighing on his mind 1 week out, which is stupid to think about. Like,
Well, I mean,
but I
someone
can't help
gave me a
it.
tweet today. Right. I said that. I said in a tweet. I said the best thing he could do is not do well, so he doesn't have that light on him. And someone said he literally gets physically ill, like vomits the week before, because the intensity of the pressure. I can't validate that quote, but the intensity of the pressure is so much for him to win the green jacket and the Grand Slam. So I don't know. I mean,
I admittedly popped into the Betsperts Golf DFS optimizer, which went live this morning actually. And my initial instinct, it's only Tuesday, right? But my initial instinct was I locked in Rory and McNeely. Now, if we're talking 28% Rory and Finau 7%, that's really interesting. So I may actually go back and run
chalk, though. McNeely's chalk. I can't.
Yeah, that's the thing. So Rory and McNeely, that's kind of a disaster, right? That's why I like talking through these things. Yeah,
well, I mean, in golf, you can eat some. You can eat some chalk. I mean, good stuff. I mean, sometimes even two players you can eat because it's, there's four other players you probably get sub 5% on. I can't get behind high nines McNeely chalk. That is just something that's like Kirk. That's bound for disaster. They just can't win week to week like some of these other guys.
And we could go ahead, Ron, unless there's something else that stood out to you in the mid-8 range. Like I mentioned, Charlie Hoffman, back-to-back runner-up here the last 2 years, a win in 2016, 2 more top 3 finishes if you track all the way back to 2011. And I just wonder how much he's going to be rostered since, again, he's been complete garbage of late.
All right. Yeah, he's sub 10, and that surprises me.
Yeah, I agree.
I've got him at 7, so that's a little shocking. I would expect that to rise as more people kind of look at his past history here. But yeah, I mean, he's not like super expensive. Now, granted, like you said, Daigle, his recent form has been downright terrible. But, reading through the player quotes, he kind of admitted that he can come into this place not playing well, and he just has an eye for the course, he says. And so something kind of clicks for him here. And so, to me, 7% definitely will be in my pool. Just going back up really quick, Adam Hadwin, and I know he's going to appear to be chalk too, around 18%. But he finished in the top 5 of my model for the week. So, maybe like Wiley said, that might be some chalk, might be tempted to play. Streelman is another guy who, he's just finished 7th at the Valspar. He's looked really good his past 2 events. He's got 2 top 8s here the past 2 years. So, another guy who's not in the Masters field who, he's getting up there in age, kind of maybe one of his last few chances to get into the Masters. And so, he's another guy I really like. And just lastly, Luke List, kind of my 3 big stats to look at this week is a player in form? Is he good with approach and par 5 scoring? And Luke List, over the past 24 rounds, he ranks 3rd in the field. He's also 3rd in approach, and he's 9th in par 5 scoring. So he kind of checks all the boxes here. And so he's another guy in that mid-range that around 13% right now that I will definitely be targeting.
Luke List also is currently number 4 in our projections with the highest win rate, 4th highest win rate, 3.9% chance to win this event. I like Luke List a lot. Matthew, I also think this is why the conversation about Hoffman and, as you mentioned earlier, Kazire are interesting because Ron just mentioned a handful of golfers in that range, 8,500 around Kazire, who's 8K. I also think Russell Knox is super interesting too. And we also know Mita Pereira is probably going to get highly rostered as well. So speak on Kazire chalk a little bit, how much you hate it essentially, and then what you want to do around that since everyone seems to be getting sucked into the tornado.
Yeah, Kazire I never get right. I think he's going to be top 5 with Hadwin, Woodland, probably Rory, obviously, and then Connors. Kazire, I don't know. Pereira, I'm surprised to see him that projected highly owned since he burns a lot of people. And we talked about Mo Pereira not having it, and does he have it this week and being Mito Pereira? Possibly. But I think that if you want the razzle dazzle, you've got Ryan Palmer down there, Texas, long hitter, experienced, 5%. That's the. I hope no one watches this so I don't give away the trade secret. But that's where I will hammer, and hopefully it pulls from Hoffman too. two Texas guys, ton of experience in the wind here. And, you know, I'll just have to say goodbye to Mo and Pat and Kazire.
And what I love most about the 8K tag for Ryan Palmer is that, of course, Kazire is also 8K. So no one, like you mentioned, universally, no one's going to play him.
Yeah, and that's the thing with golf form, right? It's that sometimes when someone performs poorly and all of a sudden they flip it, these guys improve week to week, round to round, hour to hour, hole to hole. They're constantly working on things. And so to assume that Ryan Palmer will never play well again or Jordan Spieth won't, the Siwoo Kim example is the best. He had like 400 missed cuts in a row and then won the Players. Forever, I will remember that and say recent form needs to have a big asterisk to it. Unless you're Bryson, and now I'm never playing Bryson at that price.
Which is also annoying.
28-1.
Yeah, it's also annoying knowing that if he was in full form, well, one, he's not even playing this event, but if he was, knowing that accuracy off the tee isn't that important, we just want the bombers here, he'd be a very interesting play. But again, one of those question marks in that higher up tier. And so outside of betting him, you know, at 28-1, sprinkled a little bit, I'm not sure what else to do with DFS, if anything at all. Ron, I want you to kick off the lower tier, though. Some of the names I wrote down just from what I've heard from around the industry right now, and you can go a different direction if you like. Brendan Steele, 7,600. Matthew Neesmith, I'm very interested in at 7,100. Martin Laird, 75. I know you personally like Austin Smotherman at 6,800. And then Martin Trainer at Stoneman 6K also seems to be garnering some interest here.
Yeah, I'm going to start a little higher in that 7K range. Kind of two, I guess we call it the DP World Tour now, but kind of two Euro guys who really have my attention, and they're really not catching much steam right now as far as Robert McIntyre and Rasmus Højgaard. You know, McIntyre, he not really a regular as much on these PGA Tour events, but I mean, he's got a world-class game. And so he's someone that definitely has my attention at 7,900. And Højgaard, you know, he just finished, what was it? I believe 6th last week at the Corrales. He's got 3 top 30s. A lot of these, of course, are on the DP World Tour, but, you know, I think he's made like 7 cuts in a row. Last 3 months, he's gaining in every area except for putting. So just tee to green, you know, he's kind of a very young guy, 21 years old, who, you know, as he gets more kind of used to playing here in America, you know, I just think this is another great spot for him, kind of under the radar. So those two really stick out to me. Yeah, Brendan Steele, there's a lot of talk about him coming in around 12% right now. But again, great course history here. Another guy that you brought up, Matthew Neesmith, very interesting. Obviously, we saw what he did a couple weeks ago. I think that's just a misprice, like 7,100. He talked about how he's changed his putting grip, and we kind of saw some improvements in that area recently. So I just think he's a guy who, you know, just with his ball striking ability on a course that demands elite ball striking, you know, he's a guy who definitely sticks out. Nate Lashley's another one who kind of over his last 12 rounds, he's 4th in this field. You know, he's gained 18 strokes total his last 12 rounds. So, yeah, Smotherman's another guy, local guy, played at SMU. He's used to these Texas courses playing in the wind. You know, he had a little bit of a rough time at Corrales, but, you know, he's another guy at 6,800. And one last guy I'll bring up here, JJ Spawn. He's got 7 top 30s kind of over the last 6 months. You know, he's really kind of turned his game around, and he ranks high. Recent form, approach, he's 25th in the field in approach, and he's 13th in par 5 scoring. So JJ Spawn at 6,700 is another guy that I like a lot this week.
Nate Lashley, to your point, also the favorite just last week at Corrales. Didn't come through, but also had been playing well and was a favorite. And now we're only a week later and removed from that. Also, Neesmith, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Wiley, but like Ron mentioned, overseeded greens here at TPC San Antonio. So bad putters, and like he said, Neef Smith changes grip. So perhaps this doesn't matter anyways. But do historically poor putters, do overseeded greens like make this better for us? We can chase these guys who have never putted well, and thus, who cares? Just hope for the best.
Right? Why? Because they're slower.
Because they're slower, yeah. And again, this is just spitballing. I don't know.
No. I'm not a professional golfer. That may not shock you. But I try to glean information from as many people who play and are on tour as possible. It's the inverse, at least for the few guys I've spoken. Okay, here's why. On slower greens, you need a longer backstroke. Okay. So getting it online is more difficult. You could see poor putters do well at Augusta. Sergio, right? Hideki won. Why? Speed. It's less of a backstroke to get it online. Line and speed, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So be careful of that narrative that the slowness makes it better for poor putters. There's so much variance in putting anyway.
Correct.
But I wouldn't say that is the case. Look at who's won here too. Spieth. Charlie Hoffman does well. He's a good putter. So I don't put much stock into the overseed, but I do say that about slow greens, that I look for better putters. I like a lot of the picks that Splits talked about in that range. I don't know if you mentioned these players, but I will give you my check marks here that I'm looking at. I was hoping to look at Thigala with a lower. I'm surprised that he's down towards 10%. I like him a lot. Form and just he just is a great ball striker. Brendan Steele, I can get behind that. Some other names I checked. Minwoo Lee, maybe the nuts. If I have been a truther about Minwoo Lee, I got burned. I think it was Riviera. I think he shot about 105, or maybe it was Pebble Beach. But last week in match play, he was fierce. And that is the Minwoo. He's got great pedigree. I mean, I've watched him overseas. He's really young.
I mean, he's 59th in the world, so he's
a killer.
Ranked.
I mean, he's a killer. He is going to, and someone told me, he's like, Minwoo Lee is a player this week. Watch out. Aaron Rye's another one. No, don't play him very often, but he's on my list. Wyndham Clark, I can't quit. It didn't help last week. He played well in Corrales. Grayson Sigg, I've been told, is just someone to watch out for. The one big one, which this has got to be wrong, Splits, in terms of ownership. Matt Wallace, like 1%. I've heard Matt Wallace more than I've heard anyone this week. At that price, what are you seeing?
I mean, his form obviously might be the reason why. I have him at 1.5% too, so I haven't heard much about him. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously a good price for him if he can get his game together. But he's kind of related to the Ryan Palmer discussion. You know, he's not going to keep playing poorly forever. There's going to be a week where he turns it around, and could be this week. And just another guy that
I had two acronyms. Sorry, before I get to another point. APS and APW. APS always play Stricker. APW always play Wallace. I've kind of abandoned APW, but for a long time he was foolproof. I mean, he can really do everything. What's that?
Where does APF always play Finau fit into all this?
I've never had that. That's just been a personal choice.
Please take that model if you'd like.
That's been a secret one I've kept to myself.
Not ready for release yet. Still in beta.
Right, exactly. Sorry, I interrupted you, Splits. You had a good point.
No, I was just going to say, just going down here, I know, Daigle, you brought up Martin Trainer, who has been playing well recently, but another guy who kind of made it into the field, I think he was one of the last guys in, Peter Uihlein, is at bare minimum $6K. So again, he played at Oklahoma State. He said he loves playing on these wind-type courses here in Texas. So he's another interesting guy. And Guido Migliozzi, who is in awful form right now, but he is 6,100. And so he's just another guy who I think he was top 5 at the U.S. Open last year. So he's another guy who, maybe a change of scenery coming over here to the States something will click for him. But again, if you're trying to hit the nuts, you start putting Minwoo Lee and Guido, and you kind of stack them with some higher guys, you never know what can happen.
Someone, was it you on Twitter who told me, he's like, how can you fade this guy? How can you fade Guido? I mean, I've got the inside scoop. I've done some research on Guido, and here's the thing. He's terrible.
He's been playing terrible. I'll give it to you. But 6,100, that's 5%. You can do 5%.
Andy Molitor in the comments, by the way, said, missed the first half. Can we get a cut line call? Yes. -3. -3.
Oh, -3. From what it sounds like, then, what I've gathered from the show, Matthew, is that even if we play Rory and Hadwin, Rory and Connors, it seems like there are more than enough guys we roster the rest in the other 3-4 slots of our lineups that you were still contrarian, honestly. We mentioned Finau, Ryan Palmer, Guido, if you want to do that, Minwoo Lee, Uline at 6K. It really seems like you could play a couple chalk guys, honestly, in my head anyways, on a Tuesday.
Yeah, I just don't wait till ownership shakes out a little bit on Wednesday, because I don't believe the Wallace stuff, and I think some things will increase in the 6s and down lower. But you're perhaps right. I mean, you could perhaps virtually lock Rory and do some interesting things, especially if Kazire can get 20% and you let him go.
Wiley, let me ask you this. Do you ever have any rules about playing 2 or multiple kind of Minwoo Lee, Matt Wallace types? Like, will you only play one at a time, or will you take chances and play multiple guys who, are kind of borderline for you?
Rarely. I will do that. I've learned that the best thing you can do when you're establishing a group of players, let's say you have 40 to 50, if you're building 150 lineups, 30 to 40 to 50, you want to look at guys who can make the cut. Don't take too many big swings, but also don't think of people who can necessarily have to finish top 3. Just find guys who can skate through, because if you're 30% someone and really invested and it's a gamble, then 50 of your lineups are dead out of the gate on Thursday. But I will say this. The first thing I do, and I've done this for Augusta's lineups next week for pricing, is I will build what I think is going to be the optimal, chalkiest build out there from everyone. If it's going to be 2 10s or 10-9 and 4 7s, then okay, what's the contrarian play going to be? 3 9s and something in the 6s. Then you start to build around how roster construction is going to go, and then include ownership, and then you can have some unique plays. Because this is like, in a horse racing analogy, it's like a pick 6, right? If you do horse racing, it's never about odds if you win the pick 6 tickets. It's that you have the most unique line. So it could be whatever, but if no one else has your ticket, you win 100% of the pot. And that's the same thing for DFS. What's the unique build here that no one else has that can get you to the lead? And you may be wrong. It may be a chopped, like it is in Showdown sometimes in NFL. It may be a chopped 30% owned every player, and you just have to, eat it. So I don't know, 2 6s this week. Nothing really stands out, Ron. No, I think mid 7s and higher, there's a lot more value. I really like Daigle too.
Not to veer too much off the beaten path, but it seems like you've done extensive work already on Masters salaries. Do you have a hot take of a player you're locking in like 50+%, or a player you're fading altogether that is going to be highly rostered?
Yes,
but we're a week in 2 days, but what?
I do, but I also want to win $1 million.
Okay.
So,
what about the not as hot? It's not on the stove yet take.
If Connors wasn't 7,600 and 30% owned, that's just great stuff, and a thing that you can build a lot of lineups around on a driver heavy ball striking course. Could score on par 5s. I don't know yet. I think there's one. My love for Cam Smith. I think he's a top 5 golfer on tour. You got to have guts. I mean, it's all guts team at the Masters. I mean, of course, you can shoot 65 on any other day, but when the lights are on and the ghosts come out, like you said with Rory, it just takes a different personality.
Well, with that, one more parting question before we all get out of here. It's been an awesome conversation, actually. But Ron, let's start with you. I think, Patton Kizzaire's 8K. Everyone else can decide what to do with them. You don't need our help for that. But we also know that Rory McIlroy, Corey Connors, and Adam Hadwin are going to be the 3 other highest rostered golfers in this slate. And so in your opinion, which one are you fading for whatever reason out of those 3?
Yeah, you said Rory, right?
Yeah, Rory, Connors, and Hadwin.
Yeah, I'm fading Rory if it's down to those 3. Yep.
Matthew?
Out of those, Rory's, Connors, Hadwin?
Yep.
Rory.
Okay.
Hadwin. I mean, when has Chalk Hadwin ever worked out for me? I mean, I love Hadwin, and he's playing well, but I probably wouldn't play Hadwin at that price. What is he, 90? 9,000?
90, yeah.
89.
89.
Finau just 200 more. And what we expect to be 20+% less rostered.
Yeah, it's crazy.
15%.
Sometimes I try to do too much, and I try to temper this down a little bit. Like if someone's 13 or 15% and I really like him, you don't necessarily need to go 4x. I mean, you could go 2x and be plenty ahead of the field in that case. So we'll see where Finau shakes out. I think you're right. I think he's going to be sub 10.
And with that, Matthew, he has been terrible. Like you said, he fits really well at this course. Tell everyone where they can find these enjoyable thoughts as well as others. What else do you have going on behind the scenes right now?
Yeah, I mean, I have a podcast, Golflandia, which will probably release tonight. I'm the worst at getting this scheduled. I focus, but it should be tonight for Valero, and next week we'll do some content. But at Wiley77 on Twitter, of course. That's where I do most of my chatter.
Ron knows that. Splits, what about you?
Yeah, well, first of all, we love the chatter. If you're not following Wiley, one of the best accounts out there, makes me laugh every day. No, we got a betting article coming out tonight. Really digging into the first round leader model, which will be out tomorrow as well. So those are kind of the big two I'll be focusing on here over the next 2 days.
Who's your call for first round leader? That's a good one.
I'm still analyzing the data, so check back tomorrow.
I already have a sprinkle on Neesmith, so please tell me he's at least top 5. Tell me I'm not too far off here.
Yeah, I like him. He's probably top 10. I'll put him top 10 right now.
It's going to be Charlie Hoffman, by the way.
It's going to piss me off, too. This is what's going to happen. With that, thanks for everyone for tuning in. Again, we will be back next week with more guests, Masters Week. Until then, good luck this week. Thank you to our guests for coming on, and we will see you next time.